Okay, picture this. It's 1882. Science is just exploding, right? It's explaining the world in all these new and incredible ways. But there's this one question that's still kind of hanging in the air, a question we're actually still asking today.
You have to understand, with every new scientific discovery back then, the space for things like miracles seemed to get smaller and smaller. So people were asking a really tough question. In a world that we can explain with science, where exactly does divine healing fit in?
So, into this whole debate steps a Boston minister named Adoniram Judson Gordon, and he decides to jump right in. He publishes this book, The Ministry of Healing. But here's the thing. It wasn't just a book of theories. Nope. It was a collection of stories, some really old, some happening right then, that he claimed were absolute proof that miracles were still happening.
Now, Gordon knew what he was up against. He knew that telling stories about sudden, miraculous cures would probably get him laughed out of the room by the scientific minds of his day. So he decided to face the critics head-on, right from page 1.
He's basically daring the mockers, the witlings, as he calls them, to go ahead and laugh. This quote just immediately sets the stage for the book's central battle, faith versus a world that was demanding cold, hard, rational proof for everything.
So how do you even begin to bridge a gap that wide? Well, Gordon's answer isn't to just blindly believe everything you hear. He actually suggests taking a middle path.
He points out that society had swung from one extreme to the other. People used to believe everything, no questions asked, and now, he says, they believe nothing. He argues for a middle ground, being open to the evidence, even if that evidence challenges a purely scientific worldview.
Okay, so what is this evidence he's talking about? Well, let's get into the heart of the book. It's all about these case studies, which Gordon presents not as myths or legends, but as documented facts.
First up, we've got a case from 1776 about a woman named Hannah Carmen. After a bad fall from a horse, she spent more than 10 years as a complete invalid. She was so bent over and weak, she couldn't do anything for herself. Then one day, while she was all alone in her house, something extraordinary reportedly happened.
This is from her own account. She said she was thinking about a Bible verse on healing when she heard a clear, audible voice command her to get up and walk. And according to the story, she did. Her strength was just suddenly, completely back. You can imagine the shock of the woman who cared for her when she returned home.
Now, what's really fascinating about this next story is that we're not talking about some distant historical figure. This is about the son of a 19th century physician. A little boy falls and breaks both bones in his forearm. A really serious injury. So the next morning, the boy just calmly tells his father, the doctor, that his arm is all better. And his reason is so simple. He prayed, and Jesus fixed it. Of course, his dad is skeptical, and so is the boy's uncle, who happens to be a professor of surgery and the one who set the arm in the first place.
But the boy, he doesn't back down. He insists. So finally, just to appease him, his father gets the surgeon uncle to unwrap the whole thing, probably thinking, okay, this will show him. But what they found under those bandages was not what either of them expected.
And this is just the climax of the account. The surgeon, a man of science, is so stunned when he sees the perfectly mended arm that he literally has to rush to the door for air to keep from fainting. The physical evidence just completely shattered his medical expectations.
All right, our final story is about a woman named Jenny Smith. She'd been an invalid for 16 years, living in constant, terrible pain. One night, her friends and even her own doctor gathered to pray for her. And at exactly 11 p.m., she felt what she called a baptism of strength. And then, after all those years, she just stood up and walked.
So after laying out all these incredible stories, Gordon makes a really surprising observation about who is most willing to believe them. You'd think it'd be other ministers, right? Well, that's not what he found at all.
He claims that ministers who are so focused on cause and effect theology can actually be pretty skeptical. But doctors, they see the human body do incredible things every single day. They even have a name for it, the healing force of nature. Gordon argues that because they witness these mysteries up close all the time, they're often more open to the idea that some healing comes from a power beyond their full understanding.
But Gordon's argument wasn't just built on stories. He also had to take on a very popular religious idea about what sickness even is. He goes after what he calls the caged eagle theory. This idea that our bodies are just prisons for our souls, and that sickness is God's way of helping us escape. Gordon says, look, that might sound poetic and beautiful, but it's just bad theology.
He argues that sickness is not some gift from God. In fact, he makes the really provocative claim that in the Bible, sickness is almost always seen as the work of the devil. So when you pray for healing, you're not fighting against God's plan, you're actually joining God in the fight against a common enemy.
This, of course, leads to a very logical question, one the author knows his readers are thinking. If healing is a divine promise, why don't we see it all the time? Why is it so rare?
And Gordon's answer is blunt. He claims the problem isn't with God's willingness to heal. The problem, he says, is a collective failure of belief within the church itself. The prayer of faith is rare, he argues, and one person's belief often has to struggle against this huge tide of institutional doubt.
He uses this really striking metaphor to make his point. He says an individual's faith is like holding up a little pocket handkerchief to the wind. It's just not big enough to move a giant ship if all the other sailors on board refuse to hoist the actual sails. The real power, he suggests, is in unified, collective faith, something he just didn't see. So in the end, Gordon's book from 1882 doesn't give us some neat, easy answer. It just puts the question right back in our lap. And it's a question for us too, today. What requires more faith? Believing these stories might actually be true, or deciding without a doubt that they simply can't be?